Hi, Janet. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. I really appreciate your time and your kindness doing this. So
My
before we
pleasure.
get into it, can you please introduce yourself and your background?
Mhm. So my name's Janet Veitch, and I'm chair of the UK Women's Budget Group at the moment. And I've worked, first of all, as a civil servant, working on women's policy in the UK, and then in the women's movement generally, women's rights movement in the UK and in other countries.
Amazing, amazing. So what's the Women Budget Group for the ones who are not really familiar with that?
Hmm. Well, we do have a website, Women's Budget Group. So if people are interested, they can look at that. But essentially, what we do is we bring a perspective on women's rights and women's needs to any economic question. So the way in which the economy is managed, the things that are counted as economic activity, because often women's work is not counted, unpaid caring work and so on.
Yes.
So there are all sorts of issues that build in inequality for women through the economy, and that's what we're there to analyze, and then we campaign to try and change that.
Amazing, amazing. So you've worked on gender mainstreaming at the highest level of the UK government. In your view, what's the biggest barrier that is still preventing us from achieving the gender equality that we want so much?
Yes, this is a really good question because right across the world, all women's organizations are grappling with this. It's very difficult to get even the Scandinavian countries who have a great reputation.
Yeah,
Uh, there
close.
are still things like violence against women and girls, which are endemic in those countries, even though they've achieved much more in the way of economic. So, in terms of what stands in the way, in one, you could put it down to one word, which is the patriarchy.
Mm,
So, and a lot of that comes really from women's and men's different reproductive roles. So, because women, particularly women in the global south, that don't have access to contraception and abortion and control over fertility, then you are in a situation where you have to spend um, and invest a huge amount of your time and energy and potentially your earning years in bringing up, in having and bringing up and looking after children.
mm,
And that work is unpaid,
yeah,
generally speaking. And it puts you in a position of a less powerful position within the household. It's much more difficult for you to negotiate equality in the household if you don't have a source of independent income
of
of your
course.
own.
Mm,
So I think those things are fundamental to making sure that women's needs are equally considered when people are talking about economic decisions. And I suppose the final thing is because of all that, because women are doing all this other work, we continue to be underrepresented in decision making.
mm,
So if you are not there in decision making, then your interests are less likely to be considered. So consistently,
mm.
male decision makers are making decisions that don't do the gender mainstreaming that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So very interesting point. So we have the UK, the UK's Equality Act, and it's been here for over a decade now.
Mm.
Do you believe it is still effective for protecting women's rights? What
Mhm.
needs reform? Because I believe that if we're still here today and there's still so much going on, is that we're not quite there yet. So what we need reform regarding that?
That is true. What needs reform? Um, in terms of the Act itself, what it does, as you know, is provides protection against discrimination on the grounds of 9 protected characteristics. So it's a very wide-ranging anti-discrimination instrument. Um, and essentially, what it does, just in practice, thinking about women's rights, is it supports the fact that, for example, women and men are entitled to equality of pay for equal work. They should be paid equally. There is a law against discrimination on the grounds of sex.
Mhm.
Um, so it is possible for women to take legal action. However, the legal system has never really worked very well for women, and there's a whole series of reasons for that. One is that the legal system doesn't really work very well for anyone who doesn't have a lot of resources. So
Mm.
this is also a socioeconomic class issue. But it happens that because women tend to be poorer, have fewer assets, less access to credit, less able to, less likely to inherit. And
Yeah.
again, thinking about women in the global south, many countries, it's actually quite difficult to establish land um, tenancy. You know, who has control over the land? And the land may well be inherited down the male line.
Mm.
So women consistently across the generations are
You
not
did.
accruing. Yeah. So you are in this situation where now, some of that can be dealt with by law, but some of it is about culture and custom. And so I think there are other things we need to do. And some of it is about women um, organizing among themselves and demanding a voice and starting to influence. So I would probably put that as being the first thing I would do. And some of that might mean changing laws, especially inheritance laws and things like that, that might make a difference, or land ownership laws.
Mm.
Um, but yes, I would say that some of the cultural barriers are stronger than the legal barriers. That's true for the UK, I suspect now, because our legal system is reasonably strong.
Yeah.
But yes, sorry, I'm giving you a bit of a muddled answer here because there are lots of factors. Um, but it's difficult for women with little money to make use of the law.
Mm.
And so sometimes you need to use other mechanisms. And women organizing and being part of trade unions, for example, is a good way of doing that.
Okay, great. Very interesting. So now I have one of my last question is about men actually. How can they play a more proactive role in dismantling those systems that harm women, as we all know? What can they do in terms of concrete actions?
It's it's a really interesting question, isn't it? Who can be an ally when their interests may be quite different from our interests?
Mm.
And there's a very old expression, isn't there, that nobody ever dismantled the master's house by using the master's tools.
Yeah.
So there's a question in my mind about how far women have to take power
Mm.
and make this thing happen, and how far they can rely on men to support them. And actually, men have done some really useful, powerful work that's happened in the UK. But almost everything that's been achieved is women doing it for themselves and
Mm.
demanding.
Mm.
Um, and where they've left it to men and they haven't been part of the decision making themselves, I would say progress has been slower.
Mm.
So I would love them to join in and help. I would love them to offer the powerful positions that they have and the decision-making positions and talk to and listen to women to find out what needs to be done. All those are very useful things. But fundamentally, I think if you're part of any oppressed group or any unequal group, the first step is for you to organize yourselves and think what needs to be done separately and only then come together with allies. Otherwise, the allies
Mm.
skew things.
Mm. Very, very interesting point. Well, our time is up. That was really lovely meeting you, Janet. Thank you
You
so
too.
much for all of your insight and all of your information that are mostly about the system itself, but also the law and the culture. We can really see how everything is intertwined. So
It is, yes, unfortunately. That's why it's such a slow thing. But
it's,
that's true for rights, human rights generally.
yeah, but we'll
But
get there.
we will. Good luck with your work. It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
Nice pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.